There are events in your life that are so tragic and impactful that you remember exactly where you were when you heard about the news about them. And I can recall exactly where I was 30 years ago when the shuttle Challenger exploded a few minutes after takeoff. I can remember exactly where I was when I heard that a plane flew into the World Trade Center. And for those of us who call Orlando home, I suspect you are like me and that you can recall exactly when you heard about the tragedy at the Pulse nightclub on the early morning of June 12th. I remember looking at the clock a few minutes after 5 that morning and having that wonderful realization that it was Sunday and I didn't have to get up right away. And I found the TV remote and I hit the on button, and that's when I heard the news that there was a mass shooting at Pulse and that the victims were being taken to ORMC. And so I sat up and I listened for a few minutes to the announcer say that there were 20 casualties already. And I sent a few texts to my team to wake them up to see if they could join me. And I was out the door within about 10 minutes. And I distinctly recall pulling into the parking garage at ORMC, and the clock said 5:38. Now, whenever there's a significant event at the hospital that impacts it, like a hurricane last week, or in this case, a mass casualty intake, we have a team that directs the activities that are necessary to see us through the event. It's called Hospital Incident Command, and each of us who are assigned to it have a very specific role. And because my background is not clinical, mine is very tactical and logistical. I'm in charge of matching up the supplies with the demand in the hospital. So whatever the tragedy is, I can be responsible for finding the medical supplies, the stretchers, the water, whatever it is that we need to take care of our patients and our team. And we drill for these things routinely, so we know exactly what to do in an emergency. And as I was coming in that day, I remember saying to myself, this one is real. This is not a drill. And I can also recall walking down the sidewalk and saying a quick prayer that I would ask, and I asked for both strength and guidance because I knew that there were people that needed me that day, and I wanted to be able to serve them. And there are other memories that I'll never forget. I can remember walking in to the North Tower at ORMC and seeing dozens of people out front. We were under lockdown at that point, and I realized that those were the people that were looking for loved ones who had been down at Pulse. And instead of the friendly faces at the front desk of the guest service team members, there was a law enforcement officer standing guard. He was wearing he was in SWAT gear, and he was holding an automatic weapon. So I walked to the incident command office and was immediately met by the president of the hospital, who said that I was not going to be in charge of logistics. And I remember being relieved. My initial reaction was I was relieved. He said, "You are in charge of the family room." And my relief was short-lived, and I was reminded once again that perhaps I could have been a little bit more specific in my prayer request a few minutes ago. So by 6:30, we opened a large conference room to begin convening the family and friends. And it's important to note that ORMC is just a few blocks north of the Pulse nightclub. And we became the gathering place for anyone looking for a victim, not just those that came to ORMC, but we also had family members looking for victims who were at Florida Hospital, and then we had many of the family members of the people who were still down at Pulse. And I'm going to read something to you that I posted on Facebook a few days later. I received so many messages to make sure that I was okay that I posted this on Facebook. We began gathering the families at ORMC before dawn on Sunday, and were with them throughout the day while they waited, hoping and praying for miracles and staying connected constantly to their cell phones. We provided nourishment, emotional support, blankets, and gave away so many cell phone chargers that we eventually cleaned out our entire supply from our gift shops. They all wanted to know one thing: where their loved one was. Were they in the ORMC emergency room, or were they among the 49 victims who lost their lives at Pulse? We worked diligently to comfort them and to keep them informed, all the while knowing that many of them would receive the most devastating news of their lives before it was over. And among those whose loved ones were in fact at ORMC, even the best news that they would receive was that their loved one had been shot and traumatized. I'll never forget the desperation, anguish, and raw agony I saw and heard Sunday and Monday. My heart is hurting beyond description. So while we cared for the families and the loved ones, there were great efforts that were going on behind the scenes to identify the patients that were brought to our trauma center. And when a patient presents at a trauma center, our primary function and goal is to keep them alive. And so everything else becomes secondary, including trying to identify who they are. And within the first wave of patients that we took in 36 patients in 36 minutes. So to say it was chaotic down in the emergency room would be an understatement. Some of the patients were conscious and could self-identify themselves. Some of them did have legitimate IDs. Some didn't have any identification at all. Some were unconscious, and some had fake IDs. And so, meanwhile, back in the family room, we asked those that were gathered there to send us a current picture of the person that they were looking for, and we worked with the FBI to match up those photos with the victims at both the emergency room and at Pulse. And it took the FBI a few hours to identify and clear everyone to ensure that they were, in fact, a victim and not a perpetrator. So during those hours, unfortunately, we had learned that instead of 20 dead at Pulse, that there were 49. And you could just feel the tension and the resignation of the 250 people that were gathered in the room. It was very intense. And I think the most poignant memory I have of the day was that when one of our trauma surgeons came down about 11 o'clock that morning and read a list of names and conditions of the patients that we had at ORMC and a list of those at Florida Hospital. And the reactions were immediate. I'll never forget the sighs of relief. I will never forget the cries of anguish that I heard in that room. And then after the list was read and we took the families out to be reunited with their loved ones, and then told the group that was left that we still had 4 patients that we hadn't yet identified, they all looked at us and said, "What about mine?" In the several months since the Pulse incident, people have asked me how we're doing and how did we get through all of this. And personally, I'm grateful for a loving and extended family and some deep friendships which have really held me up. Professionally, the hospital has provided significant support and counseling to all of us, and the healthcare industry and caring individuals and communities from all over the world have really cheered us on. The tragedy was clearly created by unimaginable hate, but our experience since that morning on June 12th has been just the absolute opposite. There have been beautiful acts of love and compassion and caring that have been beyond anything that we could have ever imagined. When you walk through the lobby of ORMC today, you'll see banners with thousands of handwritten messages of support from a tragic fraternity that Orlando now belongs to: Oklahoma City, Aurora, Boston, Blacksburg, Loma Linda, just to name a few. One of the messages states simply, "Humanity thanks you." And it's a heavy burden to know that Orlando, which is my hometown, which has always been known as home to the happiest place on earth, is now adding to its reputation the home of the largest mass shooting in the history of our country. We've received hundreds of stars like this one. They're called Stars of Hope, and they're decorated at hospitals and sites of tragedy all over the country. We had 400 delivered by a lady who lives in Ocoee who lost her daughter in the World Trade Center bombing. All of these were decorated and donated by people who visited the 9/11 museum since our tragedy in Orlando, and each is individually decorated. And this one states, "We stand with you, Orlando." These are up all over the hospital now. We're comforted by the fact that our team performed heroically and so well that all 35 patients that we took into the trauma center alive are still alive today. And I'm happy to report that our final patient was released from our rehab unit just last week. Thank you. We've learned that we're very resilient, and now that all the patients have moved on, we'll soon be having a ceremony to retire all the banners and replacing them temporarily with a display of artwork signifying hope and resilience. We've opened a permanent display honoring the victims of Pulse on the corner of Miller and Orange Avenue, and all of the victims, those who survived and those who didn't, will never be forgotten at Orlando Health. In closing, let me go back to that message that I wrote a couple of days after the Pulse shooting. About the patients, some will heal well, others will be challenged to survive, and all will be changed forever by the senseless shooting early Sunday morning. All of us who cared for them will be changed as well. And I've received hundreds of messages from friends all over the country asking what they could do to help. I say keep the encouraging messages coming. Pray that these patients and their families will heal and that we can stop this from happening again. I've seen it firsthand from the devastating perspective of those who've lived through it, and I'm beyond grateful for the honor of serving them. Thank you.